He didn't knock. He didn't warn anyone. The automatic doors of St. Gabriel Medical Center exploded inward like they'd been hit by a battering ram, and the man who came through them was soaking wet, wild-eyed, and pointing a loaded gun directly at a room full of sick, helpless people. He screamed something no one could fully make out over the sound of shattering glass and screaming patients. But the gun was clear enough. The message was clear enough. And in that single breathless moment, every person in that emergency room understood that tonight was not going to end the way anyone had planned. If you're new here, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The rain had been falling since 4 in the afternoon, and by the time the night shift started at St. Gabriel Medical Center, it had turned into the kind of cold, relentless downpour that soaked through jackets and made people miserable in ways they couldn't quite explain. The kind of rain that made everyone feel just a little bit more fragile than usual. Ava Lane didn't mind the rain. She never had. She stood at the nurse's station on the east wing of the emergency department, filling out intake forms with the kind of quiet efficiency that had become her signature in the 3 months since she'd started at St. Gabriel. Neat handwriting, no wasted motion, eyes that tracked the entire room even when her head was pointed down at the page. If anyone noticed that about her, the way her attention never fully left the space around her, the way she always positioned herself with her back to the wall and her face toward the doors, they hadn't said anything. They probably just figured she was cautious, conscientious, a little uptight maybe. That was fine with Ava. Let them think that. Lane. The voice belonged to charge nurse Deborah Marsh, a heavy-set woman in her 50s who'd worked St. Gabriel's ER for 22 years and made absolutely no secret of the fact that she found rookie nurses more trouble than they were worth. She appeared at Ava's elbow, without warning, clipboard in hand, reading glasses perched at the end of her nose. Bed 6 needs new vitals. The gentleman in bed 12 is complaining about his IV line again. And when you're done with that, the supply closet on the south end needs restocking. We're out of trauma dressings. Ava looked up from her paperwork. I already restocked it, about 40 minutes ago. Deborah blinked. I'm sorry, Gusgaim. The south closet, trauma dressings, compression wraps, saline flushes. I noticed we were running low around 7:30, so I took care of it. Ava paused. I can show you the inventory log if you want. There was a beat of silence. Deborah stared at her over the rim of her glasses, and for a moment, Ava couldn't quite read the expression on the older woman's face. It wasn't quite annoyance. It wasn't quite approval. It was something in between, a reluctant recalibration, maybe the kind people made when someone surprised them, and they weren't entirely sure how they felt about it. Fine, Deborah said finally. Beds 6 and 12 then. Yes, ma'am. Ava turned back toward the patient area, weaving through the controlled chaos of a busy ER night, without bumping into anyone, without breaking stride, her sneakers barely making a sound on the polished linoleum. Around her, the department hummed. A toddler cried somewhere behind a curtain. A paramedic team wheeled in a teenage boy with a possible fracture, talking fast to the receiving physician. 3 people in the waiting area watched the muted television mounted on the wall, its closed captions scrolling news headlines nobody was really reading. Normal. All of it completely reassuringly normal. Ava checked the vitals on bed 6, a 63-year-old man named Gerald, who'd come in with chest tightness and was now, having been told it was likely stress-related, watching a cooking show on his phone with his headphones in. She recorded the numbers, made a note in his chart, and moved on to bed 12, where a woman named Patricia was in fact arguing with her IV line with the particular intensity of someone who had been in this hospital for 4 hours and intended to let everyone know about it. It's pulling, Patricia announced the moment Ava stepped through the curtain. Every time I move my arm, it pulls. I told the other nurse, and she just walked away. Let me take a look. Ava set down her clipboard and examined the line with careful hands, adjusting the tape, repositioning the angle of the catheter just slightly. How's that? Patricia moved her arm, then moved it again. Her expression shifted, not into gratitude exactly, but into the grudging acknowledgement of someone whose complaint had actually been addressed. Better, she admitted. Good. The doctor should be back to check on you within the hour. Is there anything else you need right now? Some peace and quiet would be nice. I'll see what I can do, Ava said, and she almost smiled. She was halfway back to the nurse's station when she heard it, not the sound itself, not yet, but something that preceded it. A shift in the air, a change in the quality of the noise around her, the way a room full of people goes from loud to quiet to a completely different kind of loud in the space of 3 seconds. Her body registered it before her mind did some deep-wired part of her that had been trained over years in conditions most people couldn't imagine going from idle to fully alert in the time it took to exhale. She stopped walking, and then the doors exploded open. The sound of them hitting the wall was like a gunshot itself, a crack of metal and glass that cut through every other noise in the ER and made the whole department flinch in unison. The man who came through them was somewhere in his mid-30s, maybe younger. It was hard to tell under the rain and the wildness in his eyes. He was soaked to the skin, dark hair plastered to his forehead, wearing a gray hoodie that was so waterlogged it hung off him in heavy folds. His hands were shaking. His breathing was ragged and loud, the kind of breathing that came from someone who'd been running, or someone who'd been crying, or someone who had passed some internal threshold they couldn't come back from. The gun in his right hand was a 9mm semi-automatic. Ava's brain cataloged this in under 2 seconds without her telling it to. "Everyone get down!" His voice cracked on the last word, splitting between a scream and something rawer than that. "Get on the floor. Now, nobody moves. Don't move. I swear to God, don't." The waiting room erupted. A woman screamed. Someone knocked over a chair in the scramble to get away from the doors, and the crash of it hitting the floor set off another wave of movement. People diving behind the reception desk, patients grabbing at their IV poles and stumbling sideways. A nurse at the far end of the room, backing against the wall with her hands up and her face white as paper. Security was moving. Ava could see them from where she stood, 2 officers both coming from opposite sides of the room, hands on their holsters, voices already raised in the overlapping commands that people gave when they were trained to respond, but hadn't quite processed the full scale of what they were responding to. The gunman swung toward them, and the gun came with him. "Back up." His voice rose another register. "Back up or I will. I'm serious. Back up right now." The officers stopped. They were good at their jobs. Ava recognized that. They stopped, and they kept their hands visible, and they lowered their voices to the careful, measured tones of people trying to de-escalate. But the gunman's eyes were moving too fast. He was tracking too many things at once. The security team, the screaming in the waiting area, the staff behind the desk, the doors behind him. His grip on the weapon shifted every few seconds, compensating for hands that wouldn't hold steady. He was terrified. That was the thing that Ava noticed first, even before she noticed the gun, even before she started running the tactical calculations that her body had already begun without her. He wasn't angry in the way that made people dangerous and cold and deliberate. He was scared, desperate. Someone who had walked into this room because he had run out of other options and had no idea what to do next, which made him more dangerous in some ways and more reachable in others. She stayed where she was. She didn't move toward him or away from him. She just watched, and she breathed, and she let the information come in. "Sir." One of the security officers, younger, trying to keep his voice level, took a half step forward. "Sir, I need you to put the weapon down. Nobody needs to get hurt here. Let's just talk about—" "Shut up!" The gunman swung toward him again, and this time the movement was sharper, faster, closer to something uncontrolled. "Don't tell me to calm down. You don't know. You have no idea what they did. You don't—" He cut himself off. His jaw worked. His free hand came up and pressed against the side of his head, like something inside it was causing him physical pain, and for a moment, just a moment, the gun hand dipped. Ava marked that, filed it away. "He's going to hurt someone." The whisper came from immediately beside her. She didn't look over. She already knew it was Dr. Marcus Hale, chief of emergency medicine, who had apparently materialized at her shoulder with a gift for appearing exactly where he wasn't needed. "We need to call the police." "They've already been called," Ava said quietly, "but they're not going to get here in time." "What is that?" "The man is escalating." Her voice was barely above a breath. "Someone is going to try to be a hero in about 30 seconds. If that happens, someone gets shot." Hale stared at her. "How do you know that?" "Because I can see him." A pause. "Stay back." "Lane, please," she said, and there was something in that single word, not a plea exactly, but an authority so certain of itself that it didn't feel the need to shout, that made Hale go quiet. Ava took a breath. Then she stepped forward. Not fast, not sudden. She moved the way you move toward a wounded animal that had backed itself into a corner, slowly, deliberately giving it time to register your presence without registering you as a threat. She kept her hands up and open fingers spread, palms forward. She kept her chin down and her gaze steady. She made herself smaller without making herself smaller. The paradox of it, something she'd spent years learning how to perform without thinking about it. Hey, her voice when it came out was the calmest thing in the room. Hey, I'm coming toward you, okay? I'm not security. I'm a nurse. My name is Ava. She took another step. I'm not going to try to take anything from you. I just want to talk. The gunman snapped toward her. The gun came up. Stop right there. She stopped. Okay, I stopped. She held his gaze. You came here tonight because something happened, and whatever it was bad enough that you felt like you had no other choice. I'm not going to pretend I know what that feels like for you, but I'd like to know, if you want to tell me. Something flickered across his face, not quite softening, it was too sharp and too raw for that, but something, a hesitation. The briefest flash of a person underneath all the desperation. You don't care, he said. Nobody in this building cares. I do, Ava said. Tell me your name. A beat, long enough that Ava's pulse climbed exactly twice before he answered. Daniel, he said. Daniel. She held it, let him hear it back from her. My name is Ava, and I promise you, Daniel, I am not your enemy right now. Behind her, she was aware of the room holding its collective breath. She was aware of the security officers maintaining their positions, of the doctors and nurses frozen in various attitudes of shock and fear, of patients pressed against walls and crouched behind furniture. She was aware specifically of a figure standing near the far end of the ER, a man she didn't know, tall, silver-haired with a light beard and the particular quality of stillness that belonged to people who had spent a long time in places where stillness was the difference between life and death. He was watching her. Not with fear, with something else she didn't have time to identify. She kept her eyes on Daniel. You said they did something, she said carefully. Who's they? His jaw tightened. The doctor here, the one who, it doesn't matter. His voice cracked again. My son, he was here 3 weeks ago. They sent him home. They said he was fine. He wasn't fine. His free hand shook. He died in his apartment 2 days later. 26 years old, and they sent him home, and he died, and nobody, not one person has called me back. Not one person has answered a single. His voice broke entirely on the last word. The gun hand wavered. Ava took one step forward. I am so sorry about your son, she said, and she meant it, the way you meant things when you'd seen enough of grief to recognize it, even under all this fear and fury. I am genuinely sorry. What was his name? The question landed differently than anything else she'd said. She saw it hit him, watched his eyes change. Marcus, he said, barely audible. Marcus. She took another step. How old did you say he was? 26. A exhale that was almost a sob. He was 26 years old. He played guitar. He stopped, pressed his lips together. He was going to move to Nashville in the spring. He sounds like someone worth knowing, Ava said. She was close now, close enough to see the tremor running through his forearm, the whiteness of his knuckles around the grip, close enough to see the exhaustion underneath the desperation, not just tonight's exhaustion, but something deeper and older, the particular devastation of a grief that hadn't had anywhere to go. I just wanted someone to answer for it, Daniel said. I just wanted someone to... I don't even know what I wanted. I don't know why I'm here. The gun hand had dropped almost to his hip without him seeming to realize it. I don't know what I'm doing. I know, Ava said softly. I know you don't. She was within arm's reach of him now, and she saw the moment the security officer on his left made a decision. She saw it in the shift of weight, the forward lean, the coiling of intent, a young officer who had been holding himself still for 3 minutes and had now decided that the moment was right, that she'd gotten close enough that it was time to move. He was wrong. He was wrong by about 45 degrees and approximately 1 second. And if he moved, Daniel would hear him and turn, and the gun would come back up, and everything she had spent the last 6 minutes building would come apart. Ava moved first. Her left hand came up and closed around Daniel's wrist, the gun wrist with a speed and precision that had nothing to do with nursing school and everything to do with a training program that most of the people in this room had never heard of. Her grip was specific, targeted, designed to strike the exact cluster of tendons and nerve endings that made the hand release involuntarily, regardless of how tightly it was clenched. She felt the resistance in his arm, felt him begin to react, and she was already past that reaction, already completing the motion, a sharp, controlled rotation that redirected his arm down and away from anything it could harm. The gun hit the floor with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Daniel staggered. Not because she had hurt him, she hadn't, not significantly, but because his mind hadn't caught up with his body yet, hadn't processed what had just happened. He looked at his empty hand. Then he looked at her. The ER was completely, utterly silent. And then all at once, everything moved. Again, the security officers surging forward, voices overlapping, hands reaching for Daniel, someone shouting for a doctor. The sounds of a room coming back to life after holding its breath for longer than rooms were supposed to. Ava stepped back, picked up the gun from the floor handle toward her palm barrel, down the way she'd been taught, and held it out toward the nearest security officer without looking at him, her eyes still on Daniel. He had sunk to his knees somewhere during the rush, and the fight had gone out of him entirely, leaving something much sadder in its place. He wasn't fighting the officers who were now securing his arms. He was crying quietly with the sound of someone who had been crying for 3 weeks, but hadn't known how to stop. Make sure someone stays with him, Ava said to no one in particular. Her voice was still steady. He's going to need to be sedated, gently. He's not dangerous, he's in crisis. Nobody answered her. The room was still processing. She turned and found Dr. Hale standing 4 feet away, staring at her with an expression she had genuinely never seen on a human face before. Before, as if every assumption he'd made about something had just been surgically removed, and he wasn't sure yet what to replace it with. What, he said, did you just do? Ava looked at him evenly. I stopped him from hurting anyone. You, he stopped. Started again. You disarmed him. You just walked up to a man with a loaded gun and disarmed him. In under 30 seconds. His voice had taken on a quality she associated with people trying to describe something they hadn't quite accepted yet. Where did you learn to do that? Later, she said. Right now you need to get your team back online because this department has been in lockdown mode for 7 minutes and there are patients who need attention. She glanced past him toward the nurses' station where 3 of her colleagues were still standing motionless, frozen in the specific way of people waiting for someone to tell them it was over. Dr. Hale, your team. He blinked. Then because she was right and some part of him knew it, he turned and started moving. Ava exhaled once slowly through her nose. From the far end of the department, the silver-haired man was still watching her. He hadn't moved during any of it. He stood with his arms at his sides and his weight evenly distributed, and an expression on his face that she recognized with a cold, sinking certainty. Not shock, not confusion, not the ordinary civilian bewilderment that everyone else in this room was currently wearing. Recognition. He knew exactly what she'd done. He knew what it was called, where it came from, what kind of training produced it. He was looking at her the way you looked at someone you'd thought was gone, someone you hadn't expected to see again, in a hospital hallway in scrubs doing her best to disappear into the background. Ava held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked away and went back to work. Because that was what you did. You went back to work. You kept moving. You kept your head down and you kept your hands busy. And you trusted that if you moved fast enough and stayed quiet enough, the past stayed where it belonged. 3 weeks into her tenure at St. Gabriel, Ava had almost started to believe that was true. She picked up a fresh pair of gloves from the dispenser on the wall, pulled them on. Around her, the ER was finding its footing again, shaky, uncertain but moving. A doctor called out an order. A monitor beeped. Someone guided a patient back to their bed with a gentle hand on the shoulder. She walked to the bed where Patricia was still sitting, gripping her blanket with both hands, eyes wide. Is it over? Patricia asked. It's over, Ava said. She checked the IV line. It was still sitting right where she'd adjusted it, steady as anything. You stopped him, Patricia said, her voice dropping into something hushed, almost awed. I saw you. You just walked right up to him. And how did you do that? Who are you? Ava noted the numbers on the monitor, made a small adjustment to the drip rate, recorded everything in the chart with her usual neat handwriting. I'm your nurse, she said. Your vitals look good. The doctor will be in soon. She pulled the curtain closed behind her, and from across the room she felt the silver-haired man's eyes still following her, steady and patient, and full of something that had no business being in a hospital. the particular knowing silence of someone who had already decided that this conversation wasn't finished. Ava walked back to the nurse's station, picked up her paperwork, put her pen to the page. She kept her face neutral. She kept her breathing even. She kept all of it locked behind the same quiet composure that had gotten her through harder nights than this one. But her hands, for the first time all evening, were not entirely steady. The paperwork in front of Ava had stopped making sense about 10 minutes ago. She stared at the intake form, pen in hand, and realized she'd written the same patient number twice in two different fields and hadn't noticed until just now. She crossed it out, rewrote it, set the pen down for a moment, and pressed the heel of her hand against the edge of the desk, feeling the solid weight of it grounding herself the way she'd been taught to ground herself when the adrenaline started looking for somewhere to go after the threat was removed. The ER had mostly restabilized. Mostly. There was still a particular electric quality to the air, the kind that lingered after something violent happened in a space that wasn't built for violence, when the people inside it were still sorting through the gap between what had just occurred and what their minds were prepared to accept had occurred. Nurses moved with slightly too much purpose. Doctors spoke slightly too crisply. Everyone was doing their jobs and doing them well, but there was a tightness underneath it, a collective held breath, and Ava recognized it because she had felt it in a lot of rooms over the years. Deborah Marsh appeared at the station, set a cup of coffee down next to Ava's elbow. Without comment, and walked away. No words. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just the coffee, strong and black, placed with a deliberateness that said more than most conversations. Ava looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up. She was on her second sip when she became aware that the silver-haired man was no longer on the far side of the room. He was standing 6 feet away just outside the nurse's station with his hands in the pockets of a dark jacket and an expression of complete unruffled patience. Up close, he was older than she'd estimated from across the room, early 60s maybe, with deep lines carved into his face by the particular combination of weather and responsibility that left its mark in ways that indoor living simply didn't. He had the posture of someone who had spent a very long time being the most dangerous person in the room and had learned not to advertise it. Ava set down her coffee cup. "I'm not going to pretend," he said, without preamble, without pleasantries, without any of the social scaffolding that most people use to ease into difficult conversations. His voice was low and even, the kind that carried without needing volume. "I know what that was." "You're a patient," Ava said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Richard Cole, Commander retired, SEAL Team 3. The name landed in her chest like a stone dropping into still water. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Yes, you do." He wasn't challenging her. He wasn't even pressing exactly. He stated it the way you stated facts you had no particular investment in arguing about, because they were simply true, and the truth didn't require your advocacy. That disarm, the wrist strip with the nerve targeting and the downward rotation. That's SERE advanced. That's not something you pick up in a weekend self-defense class. He paused. "I've seen it performed exactly that clean exactly twice in my career. Once in training, once in the field." Ava said nothing. She kept her face neutral and her eyes on the intake form. "I'm not here to blow your cover," Cole said. "Whatever your reasons are, they're yours." Another pause and then carefully. "But I need to know who you are, because whatever's going on in this hospital tonight didn't end when that gun hit the floor." That made her look up. She studied him for a moment, the stillness in him, the absence of performance. Men who lied tended to do something with their faces, a micro-adjustment, a compensatory steadiness that was its own kind of tell. Cole's face was doing none of that. He meant what he'd said. "What do you mean it didn't end?" she said. Quiet, not a question exactly. "The man you disarmed," Cole said. "Daniel, you heard what he said before you moved in." Ava's memory supplied it immediately, word for word. She'd been recording everything, cataloging it with the automatic precision of training that had been built into her over years until it operated beneath a level of conscious thought. He's going to do it again. He's going to reign in more and more lives. "Oh, he was in crisis," she said. "People say things." "He said it twice," Cole told her. "Once to the room and once more quietly, right before your security team restrained him. I was close enough to hear it both times. He said, 'You need to find Harlon. He's going to do it again, and nobody is going to stop him.'" Cole's eyes didn't leave her face. That's specific. That's not a grieving man venting. That's someone trying to pass information. Ava put her pen down. Who's Harlon? That, Cole said, is what I've been trying to find out for the past 6 hours. She felt the shift in herself, the one she'd been fighting all evening, the one she'd been trying to hold at bay with paperwork and coffee, and the deliberate, practiced rhythm of being a nurse and nothing else. It was the shift from observer to operative, from civilian to something older and more essential, and she hated feeling it because she knew what it meant. It meant that whatever she'd told herself about leaving that life behind, some part of her had never fully believed it. You need to talk to a detective, she said. I've talked to 3, Cole said evenly. They're focused on Daniel. They're focused on the incident as it stands. They're not asking the right questions because they don't have the right context. He leaned slightly forward, just slightly, in the way that people did when they wanted to communicate urgency without performing it. There's a physician at this hospital, Ava, someone inside these walls. And I have reason to believe Daniel's son is not the first patient he's sent home to die. The ER noise filled the space between them. The beeping monitors, the distant voices, the roll of a cart down a hallway. All of it ordinary. All of it exactly what it should sound like. Ava kept her voice even. That's a serious allegation. Yes, Cole agreed. It is. Based on what? Based on the fact that I'm here tonight because my own brother was a patient at this hospital 4 months ago. Something moved behind his eyes, just briefly a darkening. Chest pains, came in on a Tuesday night, was seen by an attending, run through some tests, discharged within 4 hours with a prescription and a follow-up appointment he never made it to. He stopped. He died of a cardiac event 48 hours later. Massive. The kind that doesn't develop in 48 hours, the kind that's already there when you walk into an ER and tell someone your chest hurts. Ava said nothing. She waited. I started looking into it, Cole continued. Quietly, I'm retired, but I still have connections, and I know how to ask questions without people realizing they're being asked. I found 2 other cases. Both died within 72 hours of discharge. Both initially evaluated by the same attending physician. His jaw tightened by exactly 1 degree. Dr. Raymond Harlon, attending physician, emergency medicine. He's been on staff here for 2 years. The name moved through her like cold water. She'd seen Harlon 3 times tonight. Once at the start of her shift, once at the coffee machine around 8. Once leaning against the wall near the trauma bay, with his arms crossed, watching the department with the entitled ease of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. She'd noted him the way she noted everyone, filed, categorized, assessed, competent, controlled, nothing overtly concerning. But she thought about the way he'd looked at Daniel when the man first came through those doors. Not with the shock and fear that had hit everyone else in the room, with something cooler than that, something calculating. She thought about Daniel's face when he'd said, he's going to ruin more lives. She thought about a 26-year-old named Marcus who played guitar and had been going to move to Nashville in the spring. Where is he now? She asked. Harlon. Cole glanced toward the corridor that connected the main ER to the attending physician's offices. He left the department about 15 minutes ago. He was standing about 20 feet from you when the incident occurred. He watched the whole thing. Another pause. And then he made a phone call. Ava went very still. Did you hear it? Partial. Cole's voice stayed even, but she could hear the controlled tension beneath it. 2 names. This hospital's name and the words, we need to accelerate the timeline. The phrase hit her somewhere behind the sternum. She knew what that phrase meant. She'd heard it before in context very different from an emergency department hallway, and it meant exactly what it sounded like. Someone had a plan, something had changed, and they were adjusting, moving faster than they'd intended to move. You're sure about what you heard, she said. I spent 11 years doing surveillance in environments where mishearing a word could get people killed, Cole said. I'm sure. Ava looked at the intake form in front of her. She picked up her pen. She tapped it once against the desk slowly, the way she used to tap her finger against the stock of her rifle when she was working through a problem set. 1 beat? 2 beats? 3. You said you were retired, she said. I said I'm retired, Cole confirmed. I didn't say I was done. She looked at him directly for the first time since the conversation started. There was something steadying about his face, not because it was kind exactly, though it might have been once, but because it was honest. The kind of honest that came from being in situations where honesty was the only thing still standing after everything else got stripped away. I'm a nurse, she said. You're a nurse the way I'm a tourist, Cole said. She almost laughed. She didn't, but it was close. What do you need from me? She asked. Cole reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded piece of paper which he set on the desk in front of her without drama. She looked at it without touching it. It was a list of names, 7 of them handwritten in the clean, compressed script of someone accustomed to writing under field conditions. Those are the patients I've identified so far, he said. Discharged from this ER over the past 14 months. All deceased within 72 hours. All of them evaluated at some point during their visit by Harlon. He paused. I believe there are more. I believe there's a pattern, and I believe it's intentional, and I believe the person who can confirm or deny that is in this building right now. Ava looked at the names. She didn't touch the paper, but she read every name on it because she couldn't stop herself, because the part of her that was still capable of this kind of work recognized the weight of what she was looking at and refused to look away. Why come to me, she said. Because 20 minutes ago, you did something in this room that told me you're capable of what this is going to require, Cole said. And because you're already inside, as you know, she let that settle. From across the department, she could see Daniel being moved a stretcher, the quiet authority of 2 nurses, someone talking to him in a low voice. His eyes were closed. His face and profile looked completely spent, like a person who had burned through everything they had and arrived somewhere on the other side of it that wasn't peace, but was at least stillness. He tried to tell someone he'd walked into an emergency room with a gun because he hadn't known what else to do, because he was a father who had lost his son and couldn't make anyone listen, and in the wreckage of all that grief and desperation, he had still tried to pass along what he knew. Find Harlon. He's going to do it again. Ava reached out and picked up the piece of paper, folded it once, put it in the pocket of her scrubs. I need access to the patient record system, she said, deeper than nursing staff usually gets. I have a contact in administration, Cole said. Former military, he owes me. I need to know Harlon's schedule, specifically which patients he's evaluated tonight. She was already running it, already moving through it the way she used to move through mission parameters, identifying the variables and the choke points and the places where things could go wrong. If the timeline is accelerating, that means something is happening tonight. Not tomorrow, not next week, tonight. Cole nodded slowly. There's a patient, he said, admitted around 6 this evening. 68-year-old woman came in for what was logged as a minor cardiac event. She's been in Bay 4 for 3 hours. Harlon was the evaluating physician. He paused. Her family is here. They're in the waiting area. They've been told she's stable, she's going to be fine. They can take her home in the morning. Ava looked up sharply. Has anyone else evaluated her since Harlon? Not according to the board. She was already moving. She pushed back from the nurse's station, stripped her gloves, grabbed a fresh pair, and walked toward Bay 4 with the smooth, purposeful stride of a nurse going about routine business. She didn't hurry. She didn't look back. Behind her, she was aware of Cole's position, shifting to maintain a sightline without following her, the choreography of 2 people who had never worked together, moving in instinctive coordination because some kinds of training recognized themselves in other people. Bay 4 was 3 curtains down from the end of the east wall. Ava pulled the curtain aside without hesitating, the way she would have pulled aside any curtain on any routine check. The woman inside was named Eleanor Voss. Ava could see it on the wristband from the doorway. 68 gray hair, cut short, a small woman with the particular frailty of someone who had once been stronger than she looked, but whose body had recently started to show its age. She was awake, lying with her hands folded on the blanket over her stomach, eyes on the ceiling. Mrs. Voss, Ava said, warm and easy, pulling the curtain closed behind her. I'm Ava. I'm going to check in on you. Okay, how are you feeling? Eleanor turned her head. Her eyes were clear, sharp, the eyes of someone fully present, regardless of what her chart said. Tired, she said. The young doctor was in here before, the one with the good hair. He said I was doing fine. The young doctor with the good hair, Ava repeated, and let a small smile do the work, while her hands were already checking the chart, checking the medication log, cross-referencing the notes against the monitor readings. Can you describe what you're feeling for to me? Any chest discomfort, shortness of breath. Some, Eleanor said. Not as much as before. They gave me something, I think. I felt a little better after that. Ava checked the medication log. She checked it again. The medication listed the dosage, recorded the time of administration. She read it twice and then she set the chart down and kept her face exactly where it was, warm, calm, professional, while every alarm in her body activated at once. "Mrs. Voss," she said carefully, "has anyone been in to check on you in the last hour?" "Just a technician, a young man. He adjusted something on my IV." Eleanor's brow creased slightly. "He said it was routine." "Did he say his name?" "No, I don't think he did." She paused. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all," Ava said. "I just want to make sure I have the most current information." "You relax. I'll be right back." She pulled the curtain behind her and walked directly to the nearest wall-mounted phone, keeping her pace measured and her expression ordinary, because there were people watching, and the worst thing she could do right now was signal urgency before she had the full picture. She picked up the phone and dialed internal pharmacy. It rang 4 times before someone answered. "This is Lane Nursing East Wing. I need to verify a medication administration for Bay 4. The log shows a secondary compound administered at 2143. Can you confirm the order originated from the attending?" A pause on the other end. Keyboard sounds. Another pause that went 1 beat too long. "I'm not showing that order in the system," the pharmacy tech said slowly. "Say that again." "There's no order in the system for that administration. I'm looking at the full log for that patient, and there's nothing after the initial cardiac protocol." Another pause, more uncertain than the last. "Who did you say administered it?" Ava hung up the phone. She stood absolutely still for 3 seconds, running the arithmetic, feeling it assemble itself into a shape she recognized and had hoped she was wrong about. An unordered medication, administered by someone who hadn't given a name, at a time when the evaluating physician had just told the family that their mother was stable and would be home by morning. She turned. Cole was there exactly where she would have positioned herself if she'd been him, halfway down the corridor, close enough to respond, and far enough to look incidental. Their eyes met. She gave him one small deliberate nod. His expression didn't change, but she saw his posture shift, the weight redistribution, the quiet coiling of someone who had just received a confirmation they'd hoped not to receive. He reached into his jacket, produced his phone, started dialing. Ava turned back toward Bay 4, picking up speed now, no longer performing routine because the window on performing routine had just closed. She needed to get back to Eleanor Voss. She needed to know exactly what had been administered and how long ago, and she needed a physician in that bay in the next 4 minutes, not because Eleanor looked like she was deteriorating, but because the medication wasn't in the system, the technician hadn't given his name, and Raymond Harlon had made a phone call 20 minutes ago about accelerating a timeline. She was reaching for the curtain when the voice came from behind her, smooth and unhurried, and pitched low enough that only she could hear it. "You're very good," the voice said, "but you're looking in the wrong place." She turned around slowly. Dr. Raymond Harlon stood in the corridor 6 feet behind her white coat, pressed expression, pleasant hands clasped loosely in front of him. He looked exactly like what he was supposed to look like, a competent, confident, tending physician on a normal hospital shift. Nothing sharp in his eyes. Nothing that would alarm a person who hadn't been trained to look for what she was trained to look for. But she'd been trained to look for exactly this. "Dr. Harlon," she said. "Nurse Lane?" He tilted his head slightly with the air of someone making polite conversation at a reception. "It's been quite a night. That business with the gunman was remarkable. You're new here, aren't you?" He smiled with his mouth only. "Where did you say you trained?" Ava held his gaze and didn't answer. And the ER hummed around them, ordinary and indifferent, while somewhere inside Bay, 4 Eleanor Voss lay with her hands folded on her blanket and had no idea how much the next 60 seconds were going to matter. Harlan's smile stayed exactly where it was, which was the most dangerous thing about it. Most people, when they were guilty of something, did one of 2 things when they felt the pressure of being seen. They either pulled back, went cold, went careful, retreated into formality, or they overcorrected, got too warm, talked too much, tried too hard to seem like someone who had nothing to hide. Harlon did neither. He just stood there in the corridor with his hands loosely clasped and his expression pleasantly neutral, and waited with the particular patience of someone who had done this before and knew how it tended to go. That told Ava more than anything he could have said. "I trained in Baltimore," she said. She kept her voice even, and her posture relaxed, her hands at her sides, nothing closed or defensive. "St. Mary's affiliate program. Before that, I was in Virginia." Virginia, Harlan repeated as if tasting the word. What part? Northern. Beautiful area. He nodded, still smiling. I went to med school at Georgetown. Small world sometimes. It really is, Ava said. They were both performing, and they both knew it, and neither of them was going to stop. That was the nature of the particular standoff they were in right now, a conversation that looked like small talk from any angle, except the one where you understood what was actually being negotiated. Ava had three immediate problems. The first was Eleanor Voss behind the curtain 4 feet to her left, with an unlogged medication in her IV line and a window of time that was getting narrower by the minute. The second was that Harlan was standing between her and the fastest route to anyone with the authority to pull that IV line and order a tox screen right now. The third was that she had no proof of anything, only a missing entry in a pharmacy log, a secondhand report of a phone call, and a list of names on a folded piece of paper in her pocket that hadn't been verified by anyone with legal standing. Everything she felt. Everything Cole had told her. Everything that had assembled itself in the last 20 minutes into a picture she couldn't unsee. None of it was enough yet. Not for the kind of action this situation required. But Eleanor Voss didn't have time for enough yet. Busy night, Ava said, because the conversation had to keep moving or Harlan would read the pause. The thing with the gunman. First time I've seen anything like that here. First time for all of us, hopefully. Harlan unclenched his hands and put them in his coat pockets instead, an easy, casual gesture. You handled it remarkably well, if you don't mind me saying. Very composed for someone relatively new to this department. Thank you. Where did you learn to move like that? He asked it lightly, the way you asked someone where they'd gotten their hair cut, but his eyes didn't match the tone. Martial arts, Ava said. Years of it. You pick things up. Harlan nodded slowly. You must have been quite dedicated. I had a good instructor. He let the syllables sit there for a moment. Then, I was actually coming to check on Mrs. Voss before I head out for the night. You were doing the same? Just a routine check, Ava said. She mentioned some mild discomfort when I looked in on her earlier. I wanted to follow up. I'll take it from here, Harlan said pleasantly, firmly. He took a step toward the curtain, and Ava's body made a decision before her mind finished processing the choice. She stepped sideways, not blocking him exactly. Nothing that would register as physical obstruction, but enough to put herself in his path, enough to require him to navigate around her, enough to buy 3 more seconds. I was actually hoping to catch you, she said, before you went in. The medication log for Bay 4, I'm seeing a secondary administration at 2143, and I can't find the corresponding order in the system. It's probably just a documentation error, but I want to make sure I'm not missing something before I flag it. Do you remember ordering a secondary compound after the cardiac protocol? The smile didn't leave his face, but something behind it went very, very still. I'm sure it's a documentation error, he said. The system has been inconsistent all week. I'll review it. I already called pharmacy, Ava said. They don't have a record either. A beat. 1 second. 2. Then we should get it sorted out, Harlan said. Thank you for flagging it. He moved toward the curtain again, and this time his voice had shifted by exactly 1 degree, still pleasant, still controlled, but with an edge underneath it, now a signal that the performance of cordiality had reached its tolerance limit. I'll take it from here, Nurse Lane. Ava stepped back. She watched him pull the curtain aside, watched him step through, let the curtain fall closed. Then she turned and walked fast toward the nurse's station. Deborah Marsh was there, writing something in the shift log, reading glasses back on her nose. She looked up when Ava planted both hands on the counter in front of her. I need Dr. Hale, Ava said. Deborah stared at her. He went to the administrative floor about, now Deborah. Ava held her gaze, and there was something in it, the same quality that had made Harlan hesitate, that had made the room go quiet, that had been making people recalibrate ever since she walked through those doors 3 months ago. Right now, please. Deborah picked up the phone. Ava turned back toward the corridor, moving fast, thinking faster. The medication in Eleanor's IV, she didn't know what it was. That was the gap in everything window. She couldn't pull the IV line without a physician's order, and she couldn't get a physician's order without either Hale or someone above him. And Harlan was in that bay right now with Eleanor in a closed curtain and whatever he intended to do with whatever time he had left. She was passing the med cart when she heard Eleanor's voice from behind the curtain. Oh, doctor, that's a little cold. She didn't hesitate. She pulled the curtain back and stepped through. Harlon was standing at the IV stand, one hand on the line, a small syringe visible between his fingers. He had moved fast, faster than she'd expected. He turned toward her with the expression of a man who had just been interrupted doing something completely routine, and his voice was perfectly measured when he said, "I asked you to give me a moment with the patient, Nurse Lane." "I'm sorry," Ava said. "I need to check something on the monitor." She stepped into the bay without slowing, moving toward the monitor on Eleanor's left side, putting herself physically between Harlon and the eye of line. Not aggressive, not loud, simply present immovably in the space he needed to be in to complete whatever he was doing. Eleanor looked between them with the sharp, uncertain awareness of someone who was feeling something in the room she didn't have the vocabulary for yet. "Is everything all right?" Eleanor asked. "Everything's fine," both Ava and Harlon said simultaneously, in different tones entirely. Eleanor's eyes went to Ava's hands. Ava's hands were on the monitor, pulling up readings, making notes, doing exactly what she'd said she was going to do. Her back was to Harlon. Every nerve in her body was tracking his position without looking at him. The sound of his breathing, the shift of his weight, the proximity of the syringe she'd seen in his hand. "Your heart rate is looking a little elevated," Ava said to Eleanor calmly. "I'm going to flag it for Dr. Hale when he comes down. He likes to review anything that shifts during a shift." "Dr. Hale is off the floor," Harlon said. "He's on his way back," Ava said. Another silence, longer this time. Ava could feel the weight of it pressing against her back, and she kept her hands moving on the monitor, kept her expression turned toward Eleanor, who was watching her with eyes that had gone from uncertain to something else, not quite frightened, but close. The alertness of someone who had lived long enough to recognize danger even when they couldn't name it. "I'm going to step out for a moment," Harlon said. His voice was still controlled, but it had thinned. "Mrs. Voss, I'll be back shortly." Ava listened to his footsteps move away through the curtain and down the corridor, measured and unhurried. She counted to 3. Then she turned to Eleanor and spoke in a voice pitched just above a whisper. "Mrs. Voss, I'm going to ask you to trust me, and I need you to do it right now without me explaining everything. Are you in any pain? Any burning in your arm? Any tingling in your chest?" Eleanor blinked. "My arm is a little, yes, actually, a little warm." Ava reached up and closed the clamp on the IV line. One clean, deliberate motion. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked. "Protecting you," Ava said. She pulled out her phone and texted 2 words to the number Cole had given her before she left the nurse's station, Bay 4. "Now." Then she looked at Eleanor and kept her voice the same steady warmth it had been all night. "I'm staying right here with you. Nothing is going to happen to you while I'm in this room. I need you to trust me on that." Eleanor studied her for a long moment, with the particular evaluating stillness of a woman who had seen enough of the world to know when someone was telling her the truth. "All right," Eleanor said quietly. "I trust you." Ava stood beside her and listened to the corridor. She heard Harlan's footsteps stop somewhere beyond the curtain. She heard the soft, indistinct sound of a phone call being placed. She heard faintly the word complicated spoken into a phone, and then the word handled, and then nothing more, because the voice dropped below what she could track. Cole appeared through the curtain 45 seconds later. He took in the closed IV clamp, Ava's position, Eleanor's face, all of it in approximately 2 seconds, and he said nothing about any of it. He simply stepped inside and let the curtain fall closed behind him, and when he spoke, he addressed Eleanor directly. "Ma'am, my name is Richard Cole. I'm retired military, and I'm working with this nurse tonight in an unofficial capacity. I know that sounds strange in a hospital, and I apologize for that. What I need you to understand is that we believe there may have been an error in your medication this evening, and until we can verify what you were given, and when we'd like to keep that IV line closed and make sure you have someone with you." Eleanor looked at him, then at Ava, then back at Cole. "The doctor with the good hair," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I didn't like him," Eleanor said plainly. "He was too smooth. My late husband was too smooth. It never meant anything good." She folded her hands again on the blanket. "What do you need me to do?" Cole almost smiled. "Exactly what you're doing," he said. "Stay still and let us work." Ava was already at the curtain. "I'm going to find Hale," she said to Cole. "Watch her. Don't let anyone touch that line." She went through the curtain and back into the corridor, moving fast, scanning without appearing to scan. Harlon was not visible. The ER had settled into its late-night rhythm, fewer staff than the evening shift, quieter, the specific quiet of a department that had burned through its drama for one night and was now running on routine. She found Hale at the elevator bank near the administrative corridor, still in his white coat, looking like a man who had received one too many pieces of confusing information in a short period of time and was trying to organize them into something that made sense. He turned when he heard her coming and opened his mouth with the particular expression of someone who had been meaning to have this conversation all night. "Lane," he said, we need to talk about what happened earlier, what you did with the gunman. I've been trying to reach you for Bay 4, Ava said. Right now, Dr. Hale, Eleanor Voss, I need you to order a full tox panel and review her medication log. There's an unlogged administration and pharmacy has no record of it. Hale stared at her. Unlogged. I've closed the IV line. The patient is stable and conscious. But I need a physician in that bay immediately, and I need you to understand that the attending assigned to her case may have been directly involved in what I think you're going to find. Hale's face went through several expressions in quick succession. What are you saying? I'm saying there are 7 names on a list, Ava said, and she pulled the folded paper from her scrubs and held it out to him. All of them discharged from this ER over the past 14 months. All of them dead within 72 hours. All of them seen by Raymond Harlon. She kept her voice level and her eyes steady. I'm saying that Eleanor Voss was going to become the 8th name on that list tonight, and I think we have a very short window before that window closes. Hale took the paper from her. He unfolded it. He read it, and she watched the color leave his face in stages like a tide going out. I know some of these names. His voice had gone quiet. I was here when he stopped, looked up at her. Ava, who are you? Right now, I'm the nurse who's asking you to walk with me to Bay 4, she said. He walked. They moved back through the department together, and Ava's mind was running 2 tracks simultaneously. The immediate track focused on Eleanor and the IV line in the window of time they had before whatever Harlon had introduced into the line traveled far enough to do what it had been introduced to do, and the longer track, the one she was trying not to look at, directly the one that was assembling itself from the shape of everything she'd learned tonight into something bigger and colder and more deliberate than she'd wanted it to be. Because if Cole was right, this wasn't a physician who had made catastrophic errors. This wasn't negligence. This was a pattern. And patterns like this didn't exist in isolation. They existed because someone had decided they should exist, and because enough layers had been built around them that the person at the center felt protected, safe. Accelerate the timeline. That wasn't a phrase born from panic. That was the language of a plan. Hale pulled back the curtain on Bay 4 and stopped when he saw Cole standing beside Eleanor's bed, with his arms at his sides and the quiet authority of someone who had been guarding things for a very long time. Who are you? Hale asked. Richard Cole, Cole said. I can explain my involvement fully after you take a look at that IV line and tell us what you think. Hale looked at the line, at the closed clamp, at the medication log on the chart that Ava held out to him, with the unlogged entry circled in red ink, the pen still in her hand from when she'd marked it 4 minutes ago. He read it twice. Then he turned to the room and said, I need a crash cart in here. I need pharmacy on the phone, and I need security to find Raymond Harlon and ask him to stay on the premises. Everything in the bay moved at once. Ava stepped back to give the medical team room. Cole materialized beside her in the corridor outside the curtain, and they stood together while the controlled urgency of a medical response swelled in the bay behind them. He made another call, Cole said low, close to her ear. After he left the bay, I've got a contact in hospital security who's been tracking his movements for the last 20 minutes. Where is he? Where is he? Ava asked. That's the problem, Cole said. He was at the south exit 3 minutes ago. A pause. He's gone. Ava absorbed that. She thought about the phone call. Accelerate the timeline. Complicated. Handled. She thought about the way Harlon had looked at her in the corridor with that smile that didn't reach anything behind it. She thought about 7 names on a list and a 26-year-old who had been going to Nashville in the spring. She thought about the fact that a man smart enough to build a pattern this deliberate in a hospital this size over 14 months without triggering a formal investigation was not a man who left loose ends. And she was suddenly acutely aware that she was a very significant loose end. He knows what I found, she said. Cole didn't answer immediately, which was its own kind of answer. Behind them, through the curtain, she could hear Hale's voice, calm and authoritative, working through the tox panel orders, speaking to Eleanor in the tone doctors used when they wanted to be honest, without alarming someone unnecessarily. She heard Eleanor respond steady and clear, not frightened, just present. Ava stood in the corridor and considered everything that was arrayed in front of her. The evidence that wasn't quite evidence yet, the physician who was no longer in the building, the patient who was still laying down, still safe for the next few minutes at least, and the man beside her who had come here tonight with a list of names and the particular grief of someone who had lost someone and refused to let that loss mean nothing. "He's going to run," she said. "He's going to try," Cole said. She turned to look at him. "What's your contact at hospital security going to do?" "He's already called the precinct, but they need probable cause, and right now we have an unlogged medication, a closed IV line, and a physician who left the building the moment someone started asking questions," Ava said. Cole looked at her steadily. "That's not enough for an arrest." "No," Ava agreed, "it's not." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She opened the contacts and scrolled to a name she hadn't dialed in 2 years. A name she'd told herself that she was done needing, a name that represented everything she'd left behind and had been trying to keep left behind. She held the phone in her hand for 3 seconds. Then she dialed. It rang once. "I need a favor," she said when the line connected, "and I need it fast." The voice on the other end was quiet and familiar and didn't ask her where she'd been or why she was calling now after 2 years of silence. It simply said, "What do you need?" And Ava told it everything. The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Ava knew because she was counting the way she counted everything, not obsessively, not anxiously, but with the automatic precision of a person whose sense of time had been calibrated in environments where 4 minutes could be the difference between a mission completing and a mission falling completely apart. She stood in the corridor outside Bay 4, her back against the wall, her voice low and steady, and she gave the person on the other end of the line exactly what they needed and nothing more. No context beyond what was relevant. No history. No explanation for why she was calling after 2 years of silence from a hospital corridor in the middle of the night. When she hung up, Cole was watching her. "Who was that?" he asked. "Someone who owes me," she said, "and someone who has access to things we don't." "What kind of things?" "Financial records, communication logs, the kind of paper trail that tells you whether a pattern is one man's decision or someone else's investment." She pocketed her phone. "Because here's what I keep coming back to. 14 months, 7 patients that we know of. In a hospital this size with this many staff, this many oversight systems, that doesn't happen by accident and it doesn't happen alone. Harlon didn't build this by himself." Cole was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he'd already had the same thought and had been waiting to see if she'd reach it on her own. "You think he has a partner," he said. "I think he has a structure," Ava said. "Someone above him or behind him who benefits from what he's doing. That's why he felt safe enough to do it this long. That's why he said accelerate the timeline instead of abort. He's not panicking, he's executing a contingency. Someone helped him build that contingency." Cole looked down the corridor toward the exit where Harlon had last been seen. "Insurance fraud," he said, "or pharmaceutical, or someone with a financial interest in specific patients not surviving long enough to pursue legal claims." "All of the above, possibly," Ava said. "My contact will know more within the hour." From behind the curtain, she could hear the controlled efficiency of Hale's team working voices monitor sounds, the particular shorthand of medical professionals moving fast on a shared understanding. Eleanor was alive. Eleanor was conscious. The IV line was closed and the tox panel was running, and for right now, in this moment, they had done enough. But Harlon was in the wind, and Ava was acutely aware that the window for containing this situation was shrinking with every passing minute that he remained outside the building and ahead of any formal investigation. She pushed off the wall. "I need to check something in the records system." Cole fell into step beside her. "Administration gave me temporary access to the secondary terminal in the attending lounge. My contact came through." "Of course he did," Ava said. The attending lounge was empty at this hour, the night shift was lean, and the doctors who weren't actively treating patients were either catching sleep in the on-call rooms or managing paperwork at the main stations. Ava sat down at the terminal, Cole standing slightly behind and to her left, and she pulled up the patient record system with the login credentials Cole's contact had provided. She started with Harlan's evaluation log for the past 14 months. What she found in the first 5 minutes was not what she expected, and she had learned long ago that the most dangerous intelligence was the intelligence that surprised you. The 7 names Cole had identified were there, all of them exactly as he'd said, evaluated by Harlon, discharged, deceased within 72 hours. But as she cross-referenced the evaluation timestamps against the rest of the department's records, she found something else. A pattern within the pattern. Every single one of Harlan's flagged patients had been initially triaged and logged by the same intake coordinator. The same name appeared on every intake form, quietly in the field, marked initial assessment, completed by a field that most people reviewing these records would skip entirely because it was administrative, because it was routine, because it was the part of the paperwork that nobody thought to question. Linda Marsh. Ava's hands went still on the keyboard. She read the name again. Then she opened the staff directory and confirmed it, even though she already knew what she was going to find, even though the confirmation felt less like information and more like the floor dropping out from under her. Linda Marsh, intake coordinator, night shift, St. Gabriel Medical Center, the daughter of Deborah Marsh. Ava sat with all it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she stood up. Cole. He was already reading it over her shoulder. She could feel the shift in him, the same cold recalibration she was going through herself, the adjustment of a picture that had just gotten significantly larger than either of them had drawn it. The charge nurse, he said. Her daughter, intake coordinator. Ava pushed back from the terminal. Every one of Harlan's targeted patients was processed through Linda Marsh's intake log. That's not coincidence, that's a funnel. Someone identifies the target's patients with certain profiles, certain insurance situations, certain legal vulnerabilities, and Linda flags them on intake, routes them to Harlan, and Harlan does the rest. And Deborah, Cole asked. I don't know yet. Ava's voice was careful. Deborah might be clean. She might have no idea, or she might be the one who built the whole system. She paused. She's been here 22 years. She knows every intake protocol, every oversight gap, every shift rotation. She would know exactly how to move information through this department without it looking like anything. Cole pulled out his phone. I'll get my contact to run Linda Marsh's financial records alongside Harlan's. Do it fast, Ava said, because Harlan leaving the building tonight means someone warned him. Someone inside this hospital made a call before I ever talked to Hale, before security started asking questions. He didn't run because he panicked. He ran because someone told him it was time. Cole stopped dialing. They looked at each other. Deborah Marsh, he said quietly, was the one who told you Hale had gone to the administrative floor. Ava felt it land with the cold, clean clarity of a thing you already knew, finding the exact right place to settle. She had eyes on Hale's location the whole time, Ava said. She knew when I went to find him. She knew before I even got to the elevator. She turned and moved toward the door of the lounge. She's on the floor right now. Cole put a hand on her arm, not stopping her, just anchoring her for a single moment. You can't confront her, not without something solid. If she runs the same way Harlan did, I'm not going to confront her, Ava said. I'm going to watch her. There's a difference. She met his eyes. Get me those financials, and get someone you trust in a position to document her communications for the next 30 minutes. Every call, every text, every person she speaks to. Cole let go of her arm. I have a former operator on the east side of the building. He's been running perimeter surveillance since I made the call from the waiting room. Ava blinked, just once. You had a team in place before you came to me. I said I came here to find answers, Cole said. I didn't say I came alone. She filed that away, decided she'd feel whatever she felt about it later when there was time. She went back to the floor. Deborah Marsh was at the nurse's station exactly where Ava had left her writing in the shift log, with the same unhurried efficiency that had characterized every interaction Ava had ever had with her. Reading glasses on her nose. Coffee within reach. The complete performance of a woman doing an ordinary job on an ordinary night and doing it well. Ava walked to the station and picked up a chart without breaking stride. Mrs. Voss in Bay 4 needs a follow-up vitals check logged. Hale ordered a tox panel. It's going to need a secondary witness sign-off once the results come back. Deborah looked up from her log. I'll make sure it's covered. A pause. How's she doing? Stable, Ava said. Hale is with her. Good, Deborah wrote something in the log. That's good. Ava watched her hand on the pen, the angle of the wrist, the pressure on the page. Steady, unhurried. Not a single microsecond of hesitation on the word stable. That told Ava something. Someone who was worrying about whether a plan was still intact would have heard the word stable differently. They would have registered it differently, a flicker, a recalculation. Deborah had absorbed it without any of that, which meant one of two things. Either she didn't know what Harlon had done in Bay 4 tonight, or she already knew it hadn't worked and had moved past it. Either way, she wasn't worried about Eleanor Voss, which meant she was focused on something else. Has anyone come asking about the attending schedule for tonight? Ava asked, casual, picking up a second chart. I had a family member ask me who the attending for Bay 4 was, and I wasn't sure who to point them to. Deborah set down her pen, took off her glasses, looked at Ava with the expression of a woman who had worked night shifts for 2 decades and had developed an extremely finely calibrated sense for when she was being tested. Dr. Harlon was assigned, Deborah said, but he seems to have stepped out. She paused. Do you know where he went? The question was delivered perfectly, completely neutral, with just the right amount of professional, mild irritation, the tone of a charge nurse who expected attending physicians to communicate their whereabouts. Nothing in it that anyone listening would flag, but Ava was not just anyone listening. I haven't seen him in a while, Ava said. I'll let you know if I do. She took the charts and walked away before Deborah could say anything else. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out as she rounded the corner into the supply corridor. The text was from the contact she'd called earlier. 4 lines. She read them once, and then she read them again, and then she stood in the supply corridor for approximately 5 seconds with the kind of stillness that came before significant motion. The message said, Harlon. Insurance kickbacks, 3 carriers, 14 months documented. Payments routed through a consulting LLC has 2 registered members, Harlon and one other. Named Gerald Marsh, husband of Deborah Marsh, father of Linda Marsh. Senior administrator, St. Gabriel Medical, retired 18 months ago. His retirement package included a non-disclosure clause and a settlement. Check why. Ava pocketed her phone. There it was. Not just a charge nurse covering for a physician. Not just a daughter routing intake forms. A family. A structure built inside this hospital over years, probably starting before Harlon arrived, probably starting with Gerald Marsh, identifying the blueprint, and then recruiting the physician to execute it. And Deborah in the center of it, with 22 years of institutional knowledge and a night shift that gave her visibility over everything and accountability for almost nothing. She texted Cole Gerald Marsh, husband, need his connection to Harlon and the LLC. Also need you inside now. His reply came in under a minute, already moving. My operator has Harlon's vehicle. He's parked 2 blocks east. He hasn't left. Ava read that 3 times. Harlon hadn't run. He'd stepped out of the building and parked 2 blocks east and was sitting in his car, which meant he was waiting for something to resolve, or for someone to give him a signal, or for the right moment to do something that he hadn't done yet. She thought about accelerate the timeline. She thought about complicated and handled spoken into a phone. She thought about the fact that this hospital had 3 other patients in overnight beds who had been evaluated by Raymond Harlon in the past 48 hours, whose names she didn't have, whose medication logs she hadn't checked, and who were right now lying in their beds in various parts of this building, entirely unaware that any of this was happening. She was already walking. She stopped at the nurse's station long enough to pull the overnight patient roster, without making it look like she was pulling the overnight patient roster, a skill that was essentially identical to pulling intelligence from an unsecured file in a monitored environment, which was something she had done many times in her previous life and apparently had not forgotten how to do. She had the names in her memory before she'd put the clipboard back. 3 names, 3 patients. Harlon's evaluations from the past 36 hours. She went to the first bay. The patient inside was a 71-year-old man named Arthur, who was awake alert, complaining about the food, and whose IV line showed nothing that concerned her. She checked his medication log, cross-referenced it against the pharmacy system on her phone. Cole's contacts access was still live and found everything in order. She told Arthur the kitchen would have something better in the morning and moved on. The second bay was a 59-year-old woman, post-procedure sedated, monitored. Clean log, clean line, Nothing. The third bay was at the end of the west corridor, and the patient inside was a 64-year-old man named Thomas Way, and his IV log had an entry at 2217 that pharmacy had no record of. 40 minutes after Eleanor Voss's unlogged entry, Ava closed the clamp on Thomas Way's IV line with the same clean, quiet motion she'd used in Bay 4, and she was on the phone to Hale before she'd let go of the tubing. "I have a second patient," she said the moment he picked up. Hale's response was one word. "Where?" "West Corridor, Bay 9. Thomas Way. Same pattern. Unlogged secondary administration, 2217. She paused. Hale, Harlon didn't just try once tonight. He tried twice. The silence on the line was brief and absolute. "I need 2 crash carts," Hale said, and his voice had gone to the particular flat authority of a physician who had moved past shock into action. "I need pharmacy, I need the CMO on the phone, and I need someone to call the police and tell them we have a potential pattern of patient harm in a physician who has left the building." A pause. "And I need you to stay exactly where you are." "I'll stay with the patient," Ava said. She pulled up a chair beside Thomas Way, who was asleep, breathing evenly, unaware. She sat beside him the way she'd sat beside patients in other circumstances, in other places when sitting beside them, was the most operationally significant thing she could do, and there was nothing left but to wait and hold the line and make sure nothing more happened on her watch. Her phone buzzed. Cole Deborah Marsh just made a call from the staff bathroom. Lasted 90 seconds. "My operator is running the number now." Then 30 seconds later, number belongs to Gerald Marsh, her husband. And then 10 seconds after that, the message that made Ava stand up from the chair. Harlan's car just moved. He's not heading out of the city. He's heading back toward the hospital. She stared at the message. Harlan was coming back. Not running, coming back. Which meant the phone call had changed something or confirmed something or given him a reason to believe that whatever had gone wrong tonight could still be recovered. That there was still something here worth coming back for. She thought about the 2 patients, the closed IV lines, the tox panels running, the CMO being called, the police on their way. She thought about the fact that if Harlan walked back into this building and someone on the inside was still managing his access and his cover, he could walk directly to those patients and complete what he'd started before anyone with the authority to stop him formally had arrived. She texted Cole, "He cannot get back into the building." Cole's reply was immediate. "Agreed. My operator is moving to the entrance. But Ava, we need something that holds, something that stops him legally. My operator can delay him. He cannot detain him." Ava thought about the financials on her phone. The LLC, Gerald Marsh's name on the registration. The 14 months of insurance payments documented, traceable, already in the hands of someone who knew exactly where to send them and exactly what they meant. She thought about Daniel sitting somewhere in this building in a hospital bed, a man who had come in here with a gun and grief and a name, Harlan, and had said it to a room full of people who hadn't known what to do with it. She thought about Marcus, who played guitar and had been going to Nashville in the spring. She pulled out her phone and called the number that the precinct had given Cole's contact 3 hours ago, the detective who'd been assigned to the Gunman incident and who was at this moment still somewhere in this building writing up the initial incident report. He answered on the second ring. "This is Nurse Lane," she said. "I'm in West Corridor, Bay 9, and I need you down here right now." She didn't give him a chance to ask questions. "I have 2 patients with unlogged medications in their IV lines, a physician who left the building after I started asking questions about those medications, and documentary evidence of a 14-month insurance fraud scheme involving at least 3 carriers and 7 patient deaths." She paused one beat. "I also have a witness who can place Raymond Harlon at the scene of both unauthorized administrations tonight, and that physician is currently on his way back to this building." A pause on the line. "I'm coming right now," the detective said. "Do not let anyone touch anything." "I haven't let anyone touch anything all night," Ava said. She hung up and looked at Thomas Way sleeping peacefully in his bed with his IV line closed and his vitals steady, entirely unaware of how close the margin had been. From the corridor behind her, she heard footsteps fast, one's more than one person, the sound of a department that had shifted into a different gear, the organized urgency of people who finally had enough of the picture to know what they were moving toward. Hale came through the curtain first, and behind him was a woman Ava hadn't seen before, senior authoritative, the particular composure of someone who had been pulled out of an important meeting and had arrived already processing the CMO Ava guest, even before the woman said a word. Behind them both was the detective badge, visible face carrying the particular expression of someone who had come in expecting to finish paperwork on a closed incident and had discovered instead that the incident was not remotely closed. Ava stood up from the chair beside Thomas Way and turned to face all three of them. "Talk to me," the CMO said, and her voice had the kind of weight that expected to be answered. Ava talked. She gave it to them clean and fast and in the right order: the medication logs, the pharmacy verification, Eleanor Voss and Thomas Way, the unlogged administrations, Harlon's departure and returned the financial documentation already transmitted to her. Contact the LLC with Gerald Marsh's name on it. Linda Marsh's intake logs running through every flagged patient for 14 months. She gave them Cole's name and his role and the 7 patients on his list. She gave them everything she had laid out with the precision of someone who had spent years learning how to convey critical intelligence in the shortest possible time to people who needed to act on it immediately. When she finished, the CMO looked at her for a long moment. "How do you know all of this?" she asked. Before Ava could answer, her phone buzzed one more time. She looked at the screen. "Cole, he's at the south entrance. Security's holding him. He's asking for Deborah Marsh by name." Ava looked up, handed her phone to the detective so he could read the message himself. She watched his face change. "I need 2 officers at the south entrance right now," he said into his radio, and his voice had the hard edge of someone who had just connected the last piece of something. "Detain Raymond Harlon pending questioning. Do not let him inside the building." He looked up at Ava. "And I need someone to find the charge nurse." "Deborah Marsh," Ava said. "She's at the nurse's station on the East Wing." A pause. "She's been there all night." The detective moved. Ava stood in Bay 9 beside Thomas Way and watched everyone else move around her. The CMO issuing orders into her phone held, directing his team back to Eleanor's Bay, a second nurse coming in to sit with Thomas security, coordinating with Cole's operator at the entrance. The whole machine of consequence coming alive around a point that had been set in motion hours ago by a grieving man with a gun and a name he needed someone to hear. She thought about Deborah Marsh at the nurse's station, drinking her coffee, writing in her shift log, giving Ava that cup of coffee after the Gunman incident with the quiet deliberateness of someone performing normalcy while the walls closed in. She thought about 22 years at the same hospital, long enough to build something, long enough to believe it was permanent. Her phone rang, not a text this time, a call from the number she'd dialed 2 hours ago. "Your paperwork is on its way to the district attorney's office," the voice said without greeting. "Financial records, communication logs, the LLC documentation. It's clean and it's complete, and it names 4 people." A pause. "The 4th name is someone you know." Ava went still. "Tell me." "The hospital's former chief financial officer," the voice said. "Resigned 14 months ago, right when the pattern started. His name is on the LLC alongside Gerald Marsh. He's been routing the insurance payments and managing the audit trail." Another pause. "He's also, according to his public LinkedIn profile, currently serving as a board member of the hospital's parent company." Ava absorbed that. The structure had gone further than she'd drawn it, further than Cole had drawn it. This wasn't a physician and a family and a charge nurse. This went to the board. This went to the financial architecture of the institution itself. "Who else knows this?" she asked. "Right now, just you and me," the voice said. "That changes in about 40 minutes when the DA's office opens the file." "Thank you," Ava said. "We're even," the voice said, and hung up. Ava put her phone in her pocket. She looked at Thomas Way for a long moment. He was still breathing, still steady, still entirely unaware of the scale of what had nearly happened to him and to Elena, and to the 7 people whose names were on a folded piece of paper that was currently sitting in the hands of a detective who was walking toward the East Wing nurses' station with 2 officers behind him. She straightened her scrubs, checked the IV clamp one more time, still closed, still clean, made a note in the chart with her neat, quiet handwriting. "Nurse observation 22:31 hours. IV line closed pending physician review." Patient stable. She capped the pen and set it down and walked out of the bay and back into the corridor where the night shift of St. Gabriel Medical Center was running out of ordinary very fast. And from the south end of the building, She heard faintly the sound of voices being raised, not in panic, not in chaos, but in the specific sharp register of an authority encounter that was not going the way one party had expected it to go. Raymond Harlon trying to talk his way through a door that was no longer going to open for him. The sound of Harlan's voice at the south entrance carried through the building the way voices did when someone was used to being obeyed and had just encountered, for perhaps the first time in a very long time, a wall that wasn't going to move for them. Ava heard it from the corridor and kept walking toward the east wing. She had one thing left to do before the night finished itself, and it wasn't at the south entrance. The south entrance was already handled. Cole's operator, 2 officers, a detective with enough on his phone to hold Harlan for questioning long past whatever script Harlan had prepared. That part was closing. What wasn't closed yet was the thing she'd been thinking about since she'd stood in the supply corridor and read 4 lines on her phone and understood the full shape of what had been built inside this hospital. Deborah Marsh was still at the nurse's station. Ava rounded the corner to the east wing and saw her immediately still there, still sitting, still writing in the shift log with the reading glasses and the coffee cup, and the 22 years of institutional presence that had made her invisible to everyone who should have been looking. From the outside, it was exactly the same picture it had been all night. Nothing moved in Deborah's posture. Nothing broke in her expression. But the shift log was on the wrong page. Ava knew which page it should be on because she'd watched Deborah write in it 4 times since the start of the shift, and the log moved sequentially 1 page per 2 hours, and at this time of night it should have been sitting open at page 9. It was open at page 6, which meant Deborah had turned backward through the log, not forward in the last few minutes, going back to something, reading something, or checking whether something was still there. Ava walked to the station and sat down at the neighboring terminal without a word. Deborah didn't look up. "How's the patient in Bay 9? Stable," Ava said. "Hale's with her now." "Good." Deborah turned a page in the log. Forward this time. "Casual. Busy night." "The busiest," Ava agreed. She pulled up the internal communications log on her terminal, a function she technically had access to as part of the nursing staff used almost never the kind of administrative deep water that most floor nurses didn't know existed, and fewer had reason to use. She typed in Deborah's employee ID and ran a search on outgoing internal messages for the past 3 hours. The log populated in under 5 seconds. There were 11 entries, standard shift communications, most of them interdepartmental memos, pharmacy requests, bed availability updates. But the third entry from the bottom was a message sent at 22:04, 11 minutes before Ava had gone to find Hale, to a recipient identified only by an extension number, a number she didn't recognize. The message body contained 4 words. "She knows. Handle it." Ava read it twice. Then she minimized the window. She looked at Deborah's hands on the shift log. They were completely steady. "Deborah," Ava said. How long have you known Gerald was involved?" The pen stopped moving. Not dramatically. Not with a gasp or a flinch. It simply stopped mid-stroke, the way motion stopped when the decision to continue it had been withdrawn. Deborah set the pen down with the careful deliberateness of someone buying themselves exactly 1 second to decide which version of the next conversation they were going to have. When she looked up, her face was composed. Not cold, that would have been easier to read, just composed the way faces were composed when someone had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had gotten so used to the weight that setting it down had become unimaginable. "I don't know what you're talking about," Deborah said. "Yes, you do," Ava said, and she said it exactly the way Cole had said it to her hours ago in this same station, without challenge, without aggression, as a simple statement of a thing that was simply true. "I found the message you sent at 22:04. She knows. Handle it." She paused. "Who were you sending that to?" Deborah looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in her eyes, not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. The particular flicker of a person watching a door they thought was locked, swinging open. "You need to be careful," Deborah said quietly. "You don't understand what you've stepped into." "I understand exactly what I've stepped into," Ava said. "What I don't understand yet is whether you built it or whether you were pulled into it." Deborah's jaw tightened by exactly 1 degree. "Gerald came to me 4 years ago," she said. And then she stopped, as if surprised by the fact that words had come out at all. She looked down at the shift log, then back at Ava. "He said it was research. He said the hospital was conducting informal outcome tracking on high-risk cardiac patients, that certain patients who presented with specific indicators were being monitored, managed. He said it was approved at the board level. She stopped again. I believed him. When did you stop believing him? Ava asked. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. When the third one died, Deborah said, her voice had dropped. I looked it up myself, ran the names against the intake logs, saw the pattern. She set both hands flat on the desk, and for the first time all night, Ava could see the tremor in them. I went to Gerald. He told me Linda's name was on the intake forms. He told me if I said anything, Linda would be the one they came for. That she'd signed the intake forms knowingly. That I'd be protecting myself at the expense of my own daughter. She breathed in through her nose. So I stayed quiet. And you sent the messages? Ava said, when it looked like someone was getting close. Deborah closed her eyes. I was trying to protect my daughter. I know, Ava said. And she meant it. She meant it in the complicated, honest way that things were true when they didn't absolve anyone but also didn't reduce them to a simple story. But Eleanor Voss has a family too, in Thomas Way, and 7 people who are already gone. Deborah didn't answer. From the south end of the building, the voices had stopped. The silence that replaced them was a different kind of silence, the settled kind, the kind that came after a door closed on something. Harlon was contained. The detective was moving. The CMO was on the phone with the board. Everything that had been set in motion tonight was reaching its endpoints. Except one. Deborah, Ava said, the extension you sent that message to, who picked up? Deborah opened her eyes, and the answer she gave landed in Ava's chest like a stone dropping through ice. The CFO, Deborah said, the current one, not Gerald's successor, the one above that, the one who sits on the parent company's board. She paused. He's the one who designed the target profile. He's the one who found Harlon and recruited him. Gerald was just the architect. The man with the extension is the one who decided this was a viable program in the first place. Ava thought about what her contact had told her. Former CFO board member. And now she was learning there was someone above even that, a current CFO operating in place, who had been managing this from inside the institution's financial structure the entire time. His name, Ava said, Deborah told her. Ava recognized it. Not personally, she'd never met the man, but from the hospital's public-facing materials, the donor listings, the annual report she glanced at when she first started working here. A name that appeared in the right places with the right frequency, that had the particular visibility of someone who was powerful enough to be known and careful enough to be considered beyond suspicion. She picked up her phone. Her contact picked up before the second ring. There's a 5th name, Ava said, and she gave it to him. He's the CFO. He's currently on the board and inside the building. He may be trying to manage the exposure from the financial end, destroying records, moving communications. She paused. How fast can you get someone to his office? He's already flagged, the voice said, and there was something in its tone that made Ava go still. We pulled his communication records alongside the others. He's been running a secondary server for the past 8 months, routing all internal communications related to the program through an external address that doesn't show up on the hospital's network. We have everything. A pause. Ava, we have everything. The DA's office opened the file 6 minutes ago. She exhaled once slowly. It's done, she asked. The arrests are authorized, the voice said. Local law enforcement is executing. You did the work. We're just finishing the paperwork. She hung up and looked at Deborah, who was watching her with the face of someone waiting for a verdict they already knew. Linda is going to need a lawyer, Ava said. A good one, tonight. She kept her voice even and without cruelty. You should call her now, before it gets harder to reach her. Deborah's composure broke. Not all at once, not in a collapse or a sob, but in the very specific way composure broke in people who had been holding it together through will alone when the will finally ran out. Her face didn't crumple. Her eyes just filled, and she pressed her lips together, and she put one hand over her mouth, and she sat there in the nurse's station where she had worked for 22 years and held everything that was happening inside her body because she didn't have anywhere else to put it. Ava stood up. I'm sorry, she said, and she was. She walked away from the station because the moment belonged to Deborah alone and because there was somewhere else she needed to be. Bay 4 was quieter now. The crash cart was parked outside the curtain, but hadn't been opened. Eleanor had not required anything beyond the closed IV line and the tox panel and the steady presence of a physician who had been with her for the past hour, answering her questions with honest answers. Ava pulled the curtain aside and looked in. Eleanor was sitting up, not lying down, sitting with the hospital blanket folded neatly across her lap and her hands in her own, and Dr. Hale was beside her. And the conversation they were having was quiet enough that Ava couldn't make out the words, but loud enough that she could hear its tone. The careful, honest, difficult tone of a physician telling a patient the truth about what had nearly happened to her tonight. Eleanor looked up when Ava appeared. "There she is," Eleanor said, and her voice was warm in a way that hit Ava unexpectedly, the way warmth always hit unexpectedly when you'd been running on adrenaline for hours, and suddenly the warmth had nowhere else to go but straight through. "The nurse who stayed with me." "How are you feeling?" Ava asked. "Like someone tried to kill me and didn't manage it," Eleanor said with a directness that was almost funny, "which I understand is exactly what happened." She looked at Ava steadily. "He told me," a nod toward Hale. "I asked him to tell me the truth, and he did. I appreciate that." She paused. "I also understand that you're the reason I'm here to ask." Ava sat down in the chair beside the bed. "I just closed a clamp on a tube," she said. "That's not all you did," Eleanor said, "and I think you know that." Hale excused himself quietly and stepped out of the bay, and the curtain fell closed, and for a moment it was just the two of them, in the particular quiet of a hospital room, after a crisis had passed and before the paperwork had started. "My son is outside," Eleanor said. "Mom?" "They let him back in a few minutes ago. He's been asking to see me since the lockdown lifted." She looked at her hands. "I haven't told him yet. I don't know how." "You tell him you're okay," Ava said. "That's the part that matters most right now. The rest he'll find out, and it'll be hard, but you'll be here to have that conversation with him. That's what tonight gave you." Eleanor turned to look at her, and there was something in her eyes, not gratitude exactly, though that was there too, but something more substantial, the particular regard of a person who had measured someone quickly and accurately and found them to be more than they'd expected. "Who are you?" Eleanor asked. Not the way Patricia had asked it, not the way Hale had asked it, not with awe or with suspicion, just with genuine curiosity. The simple, honest question. Ava thought about it. She thought about the 3 months she'd spent at St. Gabriel, arriving early and leaving late and keeping her head down and doing her work and trusting that the life she'd built here was solid enough to stand on. She thought about the years before, that the things she'd done and the places she'd been and the price those places extracted from the people who went to them and the different price they extracted from the people who didn't come back. She thought about the moment she'd stepped forward in this room tonight, not because anyone had asked her to, and not because she'd planned to, but because she'd seen a terrified man with a gun and a room full of people who needed someone to walk toward the thing instead of away from it, and walking toward it was the only thing she knew how to do. "I'm your nurse," she said. The same answer she'd given Patricia, but this time she said it differently, not as a deflection, but as a truth, simple and complete. "That's what I am right now." Eleanor studied her for one more moment. Then she nodded slowly with the acceptance of someone who understood that some answers were whole, even when they didn't say everything. "Thank you, Ava," she said. Cole was waiting for her in the corridor outside Bay 4. He stood with his hands in his pockets and his weight evenly distributed in the particular expression of a man who had just watched something he'd been working toward for 4 months arrive at its conclusion and wasn't sure yet what to do with the feeling. "Harlon is in custody," he said. "Detective has him in a car outside. Deborah Marsh is being escorted to a quiet room for questioning. The CFO's office was secured 8 minutes ago." He paused. "Your contact's people moved fast." "They usually do," Ava said. "The DA's office is going to want statements," Cole said. "From both of us, tonight probably or first thing tomorrow." He looked at her steadily. "That's going to be a complicated conversation." "I've had complicated conversations," she said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "They're going to ask who you are, your background, how you knew what to do tonight." Ava leaned against the wall. She was tired. Not the dramatic kind of tired, not the wrung-out exhaustion of performance, just the honest physical tiredness of someone who had been on her feet for hours doing demanding work, the same tiredness she felt at the end of any long shift. Except tonight, the shift had carried more weight than usual. Then I'll tell them, she said. Cole looked at her, just like that. There was never really a secret, she said. There was just a choice I made about what to do with my past. That's different. She pushed off the wall. I'm a nurse, Cole. I'm also a former Navy SEAL. Both of those things are true, and both of them matter, and tonight they happen to need each other. She paused. That's the whole story. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, my brother's name was James. Ava looked at him. James Cole, he said. He was 58 years old. He coached Little League for 19 years. He made the worst chili I've ever eaten and served it every Thanksgiving like it was something to be proud of. Something moved in his face. Grief open and undisguised, the grief of someone who had finally gotten to put it somewhere. He deserved better than what happened to him in this hospital. Yes, Ava said. He did. What we did tonight, Cole said. James and Marcus and all the others, they're not forgotten. They're the reason this happened. Ava thought about Daniel somewhere in this building, in a bed, a man who had walked into an emergency room with a gun because he had run out of ways to make anyone hear him. Who had said a name to a room full of people and hoped someone would know what to do with it. She thought about what it cost a person to do that, to spend your grief and your fury on a desperate act in a public place and trust that something good might come out of the wreckage. Something had. I'm going to go check on him, she said. Daniel. Cole nodded. She found him in a room on the 3rd floor, not the ER. They'd moved him up after he'd been stabilized and sedated, and now he was in a quiet room with dimmed lights and the steady rhythm of a monitor beside his bed. He was asleep. He looked smaller than he had in the ER, without the gun, without the rain, without the terror running through him like a current. He just looked like a man who had been through something enormous and was resting on the other side of it, his face soft and exhausted and very, very human. Ava stood in the doorway for a moment. She thought about the wristband, his son's name Marcus spoken in a raw voice in the middle of an emergency department. She thought about everything that name had set in motion tonight, the domino of it, the way one piece of information in the hands of the right person at the right moment could reach all the way forward and pull something enormous down. A grief-stricken father had walked into the wrong place for the right reasons, and because of that, Eleanor Voss was sitting up in Bay 4 telling her son she was okay. Thomas Way was sleeping with a clean IV line and a tox panel that was going to come back clear. 7 families were going to get a truth they'd been owed for over a year. And Raymond Harlon was in the back of a police vehicle trying to explain 14 months of documented insurance fraud and at least 2 counts of intentional patient harm to a detective who already had the paperwork. None of it brought Marcus back, but it meant Marcus mattered. It meant his name spoken in desperation in a room full of frightened people had been heard by someone who could do something with it. Ava stepped back from the doorway and let Daniel sleep. She took the elevator back down to the ER. The night shift was winding toward morning, not close yet, but closer, the quality of the darkness outside the windows changing almost imperceptibly, the particular shift in air that happened in the hours before dawn, when the city hadn't quite woken up, but had stopped being fully asleep. The department was running at half pace. The crash cart outside Bay 4 had been wheeled back to its station. The waiting area had thinned to a handful of people, 2 of them asleep in chairs. Hale was at the main station, doing the kind of paperwork that followed unusual nights. There was always more paperwork after unusual nights. More forms and incident reports and documentation required precisely because the night had required more than a night was supposed to require. He looked up when Ava came in. Lane, he said. Dr. Hale. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said carefully, when you started here 3 months ago, I thought you were a capable nurse who was probably underconfident and would either find her footing or wash out by spring. Ava sat down at the neighboring station. I remember. I was wrong, he said, not about the capable part, about the rest of it. He set down his pen. I owe you an apology for every time I handed you a supply request instead of a real case. You don't, Ava said. You didn't know. No, he agreed. I didn't. He was quiet for a moment. I looked at Harlan's file tonight. After everything, I've worked with him for almost 2 years. I supervised his onboarding. I signed his performance reviews. His jaw worked. I didn't see it. He was designed to not be seen, Ava said. That's not a failure of observation. That's someone who spent a lot of time and effort making themselves look like exactly what they were supposed to look like. Hale nodded slowly. Then he said, Are you coming back tomorrow? Ava looked at him. Tomorrow's my scheduled shift. I know. I'm asking because after tonight, I suspect you have options that don't involve filing intake forms and checking vitals in a mid-sized hospital ER. He paused. I want you here. The department needs people who can do what you did tonight. But I want you here because you want to be here, not because you're hiding. Ava was quiet for a moment. She thought about what she'd said to Eleanor. Both things are true and both of them matter. She thought about what it had felt like to stand in that ER with a terrified man pointing a gun at a room full of sick people and to be the person who stepped forward. She thought about the patients she'd sat beside tonight. Eleanor with her folded hands and her sharp eyes. Thomas Wace sleeping and unaware. The clean IV lines. The tox panels running. The simple concrete bodily reality of people who were still alive because someone had been paying attention. She thought about all the places she'd been that had required her to be everything except that. Everything except a person whose whole job was to pay attention and show up and keep someone alive through the most ordinary and most extraordinary hours of their lives. I'm coming back tomorrow, she said. And she meant it the way you meant things when you'd spent a long time not knowing what you meant. And then you said a thing out loud and heard it land true in the world, and you understood that you'd finally gotten the answer right. Hale picked up his pen, went back to his paperwork. The station hummed with the small sounds of a department finding its rhythm again. The monitors, the distant voices, the soft percussion of a hospital, doing what hospitals did, moving through the dark hours one patient at a time. Cole appeared at the entrance to the station at midnight. He was in his jacket and he looked like a man who had been awake for a very long time and had arrived somewhere he hadn't expected to arrive at the beginning of the evening. I'm heading out, he said. The detective has everything he needs from me for tonight. I'll be back for statements tomorrow. He paused. Both patients are stable. The financial documentation is with the DA. Harlon, the CFO, and Gerald Marsh are all being processed. A beat. Linda Marsh is with her mother. I don't know how that goes. Neither do I, Ava said. Cole held her gaze for a moment. There was a great deal in that look acknowledgement and something like respect in the particular silent recognition of two people who had done something difficult together and didn't need to perform the fact of it. James would have liked you, he said, simply. Ava said, I think I would have liked his chili. Cole almost smiled. He nodded once, walked away. She watched him go, and then she turned back to the station and picked up her pen and went back to the paperwork that had been waiting for her since before any of this started, the intake forms and the vitals logs and the ordinary documentation of an ordinary night shift that had turned out to be something else entirely. The ER hummed around her. The monitors beeped. Somewhere down the corridor, a patient called for a nurse and was answered. The automatic doors opened and closed as the first of the early morning arrivals began to trickle. In new faces, new needs, new stories that hadn't finished being written yet. Ava Lane picked up her pen, straightened her scrubs, and went back to work. She was a former Navy SEAL who had walked away from one life and built another. And tonight both lives had asked something of her, and she had given it without flinching. And tomorrow she would come back and do what she always did. Show up quietly, pay attention, and stand between the people in her care and whatever was trying to harm them. Not because anyone had assigned it to her. Not because it made her a hero, but because it was what she knew how to do, and because the world had an endless supply of nights that needed someone in them who wasn't afraid to step forward. Some people were built for ordinary lives and grateful for them, and that was its own kind of grace. Ava was built for this. And now finally everyone in St. Gabriel Medical Center knew it.